Today, we're talking about transforming pharma with digital health. I'm delighted to say we've got a really distinguished panel with us today, all experts in their own field. So we should be in for a very informed and insightful discussion about the role of digital health in pharma and accelerating progress with respect to pharma. So without further ado, I'm going to ask each of our guests to introduce themselves and say a little bit about their organisations and their areas of specific interest. So in no particular order, perhaps I could start with you, Shameem, and ask you to introduce yourself and say a few words about your organisation.
Sure. I represent blueBriX. We have been in digital health for dogs years, almost 15 years now. I personally have been in digital health for the last 30 years. Obviously, I started when I was a baby. So for the past 15 years, we have been working on the digital health platform where people or customers can build their own digital health solutions in a low-code, no-code fashion, even before people started talking about it and became fashionable to talk about. So we actually have really working clients with millions of patients on our platform. And so we have been doing this. And recently we entered into the pharma sector to enable their digital journey. So we are focusing mostly on patient support programs and patient enablement for the last 2 years. We are now based, one of our offices is based in Switzerland, in Geneva. Right now we have offices in Washington, D.C., and in India. We have about 200 employees with approximately 2 million patients on our platform.
Great. Thanks very much, Shameem. Becky?
Yeah, hi. Thanks ever so much. So my name's Becky Warnes. I work as an independent business consultant. I've spent 10 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and I've spent the last 2.5 years working as a consultant for myself. The main part of my work is working really as an advisor and as a collaborator, as an introducer. So helping health tech companies, helping startups introduce themselves to the pharmaceutical industry, but also help them introduce themselves to the NHS here in England, and also health systems and buyers within their own countries as well. So I'm very much looking at it from a different perspective, but more of a strategic and more of a commercially focused perspective. I also work as a project manager within the NHS, National Health Service here in England. I've been very much involved in virtual wards and electronic patient records. So I also bring that perspective as well, really. So the buyer perspective as well as looking at it from just a supplier. And that's
Thanks,
me.
Becky. Thanks, Becky. A lot to go at there. Janice?
Hey, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm actually a strategy consultant. I work with asset teams in the pharmaceutical industry, helping them develop their commercialization strategies as effectively from as early as possible. And then more recently, what I've done is really invested heavily in building a digital platform, which effectively embeds a strategic thinking process and allows companies to, I'm going to say, have an agile approach to strategy development. So that they can respond to changes in the environment, new data, information, etc., and adjust their strategy as they're developing this molecule accordingly, and obviously optimize their plans.
Thanks very much, Janice. And last but not least, Alistair.
Hiya. Yeah. Thanks very much for having me. I'm Chief Pharmacist at Phlo, and we've got kind of two sides to the business. One side is looking at providing a distance selling NHS business, dispensing GPs prescriptions and looking after that dispensing and then the sort of delivery processes for patients. And we also operate a B2B side of things for private, predominantly health startups, and that is called Phlo Connect. And so in addition to the dispensing and the delivery aspects, we also include the ability to do prescribing, and there are technological integrations via API and so on. Before working with Phlo, I was chief pharmacist at Echo, which was then bought by Lloyds Pharmacy and became Lloyds Direct, founding clinician there, and we took that from 0 patients to getting on for about 600,000, which was NHS only. So a lot of scaling there, which is going to be one of my things that we're focusing on at Phlo in the short and medium term.
Great, thanks for that, Alistair. Well, that's a really nice introduction, because I think the first thing that most people would like to hear us talk about is how we scale digital health initiatives and bring products and medicines to market as rapidly as possible. Maybe, Shameem, we could start with you, and you'd like to address that subject.
So where would I begin, right? So what we do, what my company does is we enable digital health products to come to market quickly. So we have built out a platform with a lot of components that people can use it in a Lego format. And so they can deploy their digital health solutions quickly. And we have tested this out in the provider space for the last 15 years. We have very big names, some of the top healthcare organizations in the United States and other places using our platform to build out specialized digital health solutions and go to market. So usually they white label the solution and they go to market with that. And we have presence in the United States, in Africa, in Latin America, India, and the Middle East. So that's why we say that we have about 2 million patients on our platform right now, with providers spread across 3 to 4 continents at this stage. So here is the best example of the recent vaccine for the current episode that we are facing, the mRNA vaccines and other things, right? So what was the methodology of developing digital health solutions until recently? It was all bespoke. And so you had to go to different kind of people to start development from scratch, or you buy bespoke solutions for that. The problem with that is, one, it takes a lot of time. It goes through certification. And when you buy a specialized solution, it is a silo. It doesn't fit anywhere. So what we have come up with is a platform where it's like building from Lego blocks, right? And so if there is a new therapy, and just like the mRNA platform, the recent antivirus that was developed, it's quicker to build out solutions and take it to market quickly. That's one thing. And then scaling across countries and continents and therapeutic areas becomes so easy for pharma. So the spend, most importantly, the time to market becomes really easy. And that's what we are focusing on for the past 15 years or so.
Great, thanks, Shameem. Becky, in your role, you must engage frequently with that subject, how to bring new drugs to market as rapidly as possible and commercialize them effectively. Can you say something about your experience of that?
Yeah, I think really from where I sit, and this is very much where I take more of an advisor kind of role, it's really understanding what countries those drugs need to be sold into, where they're looking to sell those drugs into. I think also with regard to the technologies that are there to support that nowadays, it's really understanding and having that governance in place, so that when you've got, certainly here in the UK, you've got NICE, you've got MHRA that are here as regulators, is really ensuring that evidence is robust, that it's transparent, that when there is new technologies, when there's new software being used to support that market piece, that actually everyone understands. There's clear communication. I think certainly the life sciences industry, the pharma industry, has always been heavily regulated. And that's the reason sometimes why the industry as a whole has been relatively slow in comparison to others to actually adopting digital technologies. We're all still learning. And I think that's one thing and one clear message that I put across to my clients is very much just make sure that transparency is there, make sure that the governance is there, make sure that what you're doing is repeatable. In terms of a commercialization of products, I think that's really understanding the environment in which you're going to be selling into. And that's not just a regulatory side of things, but it's also the mindset of the healthcare professionals. It's also the demographics of the populations. And it's really doing that research piece. Technology's here and it's evolving, and it's going to make lives so much better in terms of being able to bring products to market quicker. But ultimately, you've got to be ensuring that there is that unmet need, and it's not just technology for the sake of technology.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. Janice, I mean, obviously, much of your experience is about making sure there's an underpinning strategic approach to these things.
Yeah. So and then with technology, so I feel there's a huge opportunity for technology to enable that commercial strategy thinking, or the thinking that needs to be undertaken to make really good choices along the way, and to be able to update that thinking as and when you need to. If I say to you, a lot of small to medium-sized biotech companies are hugely resource constrained, and yet a lot of the innovation is happening there. And what they need to be is they need to attract investors, commercial partners, and they need a really robust commercialization strategy to help them do that. And I just see technology as being a fabulous vehicle for helping them develop that strategy, but actually to allow others to collaborate with them on the development of that strategy as and when needed. So hopefully we'll get those innovations to market earlier. And the other thing probably that's really important is, what's the hallmark of a great commercialization strategy? It's one which positions the drug effectively amongst the other choices that are available when it gets to marketplace, and that maximizes the commercial potential of that drug. Make sure that the right patients get access to that medication at the right time. So it's huge. And today we know that people are not only focused on drugs, but they're also actually saying, well, maybe we need a piece of digital tech to help people get access to that drug in some way. So to me, when you're building your commercialization strategy, you're going beyond just drug. You are actually also thinking about digital health applications.
Yeah, thanks, Janice. I'd like to come back to that question of patient access, but Alistair, could you maybe say something about that question of speed in bringing new drugs and treatments to market, and maybe address some of the constraining factors as well as the opportunities?
Sure. I mean, from our perspective, we generally are looking at things once the medicine's already in the market, for example. But I think one of the things that needs to be addressed when you're growing a market around a new molecule is thinking about how you are going to scale the logistics. Making sure that there is adequate provision within the supply chain to get the product to people who can deliver it. It may be that there are specialist digital clinics as well that are focusing on certain categories of medicine, and they are going to experience a greater sort of need to prescribe that, and so therefore any partners that they're working with would need to also make sure that they've got access to sufficient medicine. I mean, in terms of just making sure that medicines get delivered, people can't take a medicine unless they physically got it. And one of the things that we're finding is that as people change their lives, expecting the ability to have the sort of digital interaction on how you manage that kind of final mile if you like, stage of things is vital. You know, I think we found that our quickest delivery from somebody placing an order to having a consultation and then actually having it delivered. They happen to live very close to one of our hubs, but we managed to do it in under 10 minutes. That is not a standard way of doing things, but there is potentially an option for much more real-time things if you can get information to flow through the system properly. If you've got good APIs and integrations between logistics, between clinical systems, all of that sort of thing, really important. And then I think in terms of getting a service up and running to people, we've got a system where people, again, a little bit like Shameem was saying, the sort of idea of plugging in and white labeling. We've got something that works, and so we want people to be able to plug into that without the setup and difficulty costs of trying to develop something new. And so we've got a portal that people can use for prescribing in low volumes. And that also helps with that just very initial fact-finding and iteration phase of things. And so then once we've agreed what a good clinical and safe process will look like with a partner, then we're able to turn that into an integration via an API and get a lot more automation happening in those processes, where then, you know, people can divert into an appropriate consultation if there's anything that's needed at that time.
Thanks, Alistair. Let's stick with that subject of patient access then, because it sits at the heart of much that we'll talk about today. It seems to me that it's still quite difficult, particularly probably in areas where you've got dispersed populations, for people to have consultations, to understand what treatment they want, and to get access to the right kinds of drugs. How far away are we, do we think, from finding a way to use digital to revolutionize the way people get access to drugs? Are we well down that road, or is there still some considerable way to go? I don't know who'd like to pick that up. Shameem.
From what I am seeing today, this is very distracting when I see myself talk. So from what I am seeing today, I don't think the pharma industry is serious about digital health, right? In the sense that they're paying lip service to what is going on, but their primary focus is to sell more and more drugs. And so this whole idea about bringing in digital therapy, so let me step back and talk about this a little bit more, in the sense, from experience and from clinical findings, what we are seeing is that there are certain areas where digital health can become a big game changer, especially in behavioral health, or as you call it, in mental health in Europe, and in the US, we call it more behavioral health aspect of it. And what I'm finding now, especially like what happened in the car industry before, where you are paying lip service to the electric cars, and you had all these big car companies just having a few $1 billion here, and they're developing these electric cars, but they never paid serious attention to it until Tesla came along. And that is precisely what is going on in digital therapeutics or digital therapy. It's basically lip service. And in order to change that, people really need to pay substantial attention, or some disruptor needs to come along and make that change. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'd be really interested. I don't know if you finished, Shameem. Do you want to carry on with that, or would you like to hear what other panelists?
No. It's a little distracting to see myself and rather not see you. But yeah, go ahead.
I'd be interested to hear from some of the other panelists about what Shameem's just said. Are we seeing a reluctance to really push forward with investment in these kind of digital health platforms rather than paying lip service to them? Becky?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I do agree with that. I think what's happening at the moment, life sciences, big pharma are very much aware that there are very few blockbuster drugs on their pipelines, if any. And I think they are actually looking for an alternative. I guess, again, it comes back to the regulation. It comes back to how tightly industry is regulated and what country you're in. Here in the UK, we are very heavily regulated as an industry. In Europe, not so much. In America, not so much. And I think that really does play a part on how much companies are really, willing to invest. I think also you've got to think about the shareholders and what are their expectations. And is it that the companies themselves are not buying in, or is it that the shareholders are not there yet? Do they need convincing? Because ultimately, we're talking about pharma, we're talking about life sciences. It's commercialization. It's making money. And I think that the amount of work that's being put in on the ground with the companies that I'm working with, which are some of the big hitters globally, there is a lot of investment at the moment, not anywhere near as much as what's, in terms of drug development, but there is a huge amount of investment. There's also very much an understanding within pharma that they can actually keep up to date with all the advances that are happening in tech and in digital health. Hence, they are actively looking for collaborators. Hence, they're looking to work with startups, and a lot of them have got innovation hubs across the world where they are, running competitions and trying to get involved. I think pharma don't know what to do yet. I think there's a few that possibly are sitting on the fence, but I think the majority are throwing their hat in the ring. I guess I wouldn't say anybody's gone full throttle and is hammering the daylights out of it, but I think over the next few years there will be opportunities that will be seized by some of the big players.
And if I may interrupt, and that's precisely my point, right? They are sitting back and they're waiting for who is going to, thread the needle at this stage. They are not taking that leadership and saying, okay, let's iterate, let's experiment, let's fail, and go forward with it. That leadership has not come from big pharma yet. That's precisely my point.
No, I agree. I agree with that. I like I say, I question whether that's more shareholders than it is C-suite of a pharma company. But we're not sat around the table, so we don't know that much.
Janice, sorry, please continue.
Right. So he was going to say something. Do you want me to?
Janice, you go for it. I'll come in after you.
Okay, cool. So I was just going to say, with the companies that I'm working with, I feel there is an interest in digital therapeutics. Basically, if I think more broadly, so if you think about where we're losing patients, so if you want to optimize, so let's keep the drug focus for a moment, but actually, more and more companies are actually focused on creating value for the patient, for the healthcare system, so I think that is really central to make sure that what we do is sustainable. So it doesn't have to be big anymore, but these small rare diseases, what are we doing there and how are we creating value there? And I feel they are open to identify opportunities to, if I use the word, improve that patient flow, get patients to access their medicines, get patients to be more compliant with their medication, and maybe to see complementary, drug plus digital therapeutic. So I feel there is, generally speaking, more interest. That would be my experience. But it's early on. The problem is you can't start thinking about digital therapeutics at launch. You're having to start thinking about with whatever you're working on in phase 1. You have to identify where the opportunities to do things differently. So earlier, and then, it's almost building that thinking alongside the development of your drug.
Alistair?
So, I think I think one of the things that we've seen with some of the digital and sort of patient, a lot of it's really like an enhanced patient support program, for example, as the sort of thing that we would see. And you are at risk of splitting information and siloing bits of information so that one drug, one company provides a service to a patient and all of that information is there. And then if they, you know, let's be real, patients and people are intersectional. They've got a lot of things going on all at once. There's very rarely just one thing, whether or not that's health related or whether it's in broader life. But building a system that is a set of siloed individual little microservices creates such a complex system. It's unnavigable. And so it's very, very difficult for patients. It's very difficult for healthcare practitioners to operate within that in a meaningful way. You know, first of all, making it actually usable, but then also making it safe by making sure that you've got that safety net of visibility and awareness of all the bits of data that could and should be flying around the system, attached and surrounding the patient. You know, we've got a massive opportunity coming up with pharmacogenomics and personalization of medicine choice and dosing and all of those sorts of things, where data and technology supporting that is going to be vital. But it needs to wrap around the patient and not around a single product. So pharma companies, I think, really need to embrace the idea of APIs, in this case the tech version of APIs, where you've got that interoperability between systems and the ability for data to flow, safely and securely. You know, we really want to make sure that that's the case. But potentially, I think, you know, does regulation need to have a bit of a refresh and allow for much more kind of, you know, appropriate, safe data sharing, where it's actually in the interests of the patient and the health system to make that happen. You know, ideally we would get to a stage where it's improving people's health and it's making it cheaper and more efficient to actually deliver the service overall. You know, you're not having to remember a million passwords, fax bits of paper, just all of these things that are taking stuff offline when we manage with everything else. You know, in our mobiles, we've got health suites from Apple and Android that it's not impossible to build something that connects to those, so then the patient can sort of have an overarching thing, and then they can decide what they share with their GP or with their hospital consultant or whoever it may be. There may also then be an opportunity for sort of broader digital support in care around, say, social prescribing and lifestyle interventions that don't necessarily involve just the medication, but are thinking of a slightly more holistic and broader health point.
How far away are we, Alistair, do you think, from a sort of collective vision that sees us move towards that kind of holistic healthcare system where we all have our digital healthcare passport and carry our own data and take responsibility for self-care? Is there a, I guess it'll be different from nation to nation, but is there a collective movement towards that now with any kind of coherence?
It's like so many of these things. There are pockets of demand and desire for that to happen, and there are pockets of excellence where it is happening. But the health system is incredibly complex. You know, I think when you think of all of the different moving parts that are there, it's very, very difficult to join all of those up. I think a lot of patients actually imagine that we kind of are there or should be there, and are quite often a bit surprised. I mean, just even within pharmacy and primary care with GPs, patients are often surprised that we can't see some of the notes that the GP's written about them, given that we're sort of taking on the next bit of that care and often need to have a little bit of visibility over that sort of thing. So just something as simple as a visibility of notes isn't always there when we would expect it, let alone then the pharmacy team writing some notes that would support elements of that care as well. So yeah, and you know, I think when we do get to more complex care with pharmacogenomics and looking at how somebody's own genetic makeup affects which would be the most appropriate medicine to choose for them. We're going to have that, and you can't have it operating on this sort of single molecule by molecule, company by company basis.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. Shameem, moving towards that kind of holistic approach to healthcare.
I don't think a holistic approach is the right word to use, right? I think it's a personalized medicine. That is where things will go if we use the technology tools correctly, right? So how many more blockbuster drugs are out there? How much longer can you fleece or milk this industry for the pharma company? The pharma companies should start thinking about whether they are in the business of making drugs or finding holistic solutions to a particular problem. And that means it's not just drugs, it's also behavioral therapies and behavioral modifications, digital therapeutics and all that. And I feel at this stage, they have not seriously started thinking about it until they get a Tesla moment, right? And so when you start going and when you start looking at things and all the therapies out there, what works for a white man doesn't work for a brown man. And we know that from all the digital experiences that we have seen in the past. There's a lot of cures and medicines that work for certain segments of the population. That doesn't work for the others. And so the journey is towards more personalized medicine. And you need to have systems that scale towards that personalization in medications and therapy. And that's where I think things are going. And if you build it on a digital platform that is scalable, it can impact more number of people than our current model. So that's what I think about that whole thing.
Thanks, Shameem. Janice?
Maybe another perspective. So the industry is investing a lot in really trying to better understand the patient journey and look for, I'm going to say, efficiencies. Are there ways that we can improve how quickly people get diagnosed, et cetera, et cetera? Looking for, are there areas where we can actually change something to achieve better outcomes? And I do think, again, I'm going to say, I think tech is definitely an area that people are saying, is there something we can introduce or do that can really optimize that patient journey? So I'm still quite positive and optimistic about where we're going and what we're doing and what we're trying to understand. I do, however, think the challenge, I've seen so many diagrams of all the different digital health applications or whatever that are available, and it's overwhelming. It's probably like drug choice. It's overwhelming. Yeah. So I don't know how a healthcare system manages that. And maybe that goes towards what Alistair was saying earlier about somehow we need these different things to talk to each other, because you can't have an app or something for your diabetes, for your cardiovascular, for your, it just doesn't make sense, actually. So we do need something that can work across disease states, I guess, from a patient perspective.
Thanks, Janice. Becky, do you have anything to add to that?
I guess, yeah, I think interoperability, integration into health systems, into clinical systems is a massive barrier at the moment. It's causing huge delays in health systems implementing digital technology. And even, across the world, everyone's at different stages. I think America's far more advanced than certainly we are in the UK. We're more advanced than a lot of Europe here in the UK, which, is quite scary when you think about the problems and the slowness in which we are bringing on board electronic health records, for example. I guess the one thing that stands out for me really is with things like electronic health records, everyone's trying to get their apps to feed in so that there's live data feeds and clinicians are updated right away. They've got full details. It's very much putting the health system as the data controller. And I question in the future whether one of the ways to actually get around the cyber security, the data governance side of things, is actually to make us as a patient the data controller, and for us to have that health record. And then for those technologies to actually be integrated into a patient-held record. Now, we do have patient-held records here in the UK, but the data that flows into them is very much controlled by the health system. I think maybe, you know, we were talking about disruptors, maybe that would be a very positive disruptor to say, right, this is my data, this is information about me, this is how I want to be playing it moving forward. And, you know, it's something that I don't think is that unrealistic to be thinking of as a possible future state, to be honest.
Thanks, Becky. Just sticking with that subject of patient support, Alistair, if I could come back to you again. It sometimes seems as though when somebody's been given a drug, at that point they're expected to take it and move forward. Actually getting patients to use those things that are prescribed for them fully and effectively and then follow up must be quite a challenge as well. And one would imagine digital support would be a very effective way to follow patients through and make sure that they use drugs effectively and get the benefit. And then, you know, there's some kind of punctuation point on that journey.
Yeah, I think so. The opportunities with having a digital solution here are that you're not limited to a single conversation and expecting a patient who may just have received a diagnosis or be feeling unwell. You're not expecting them to necessarily remember that information and retain it in a useful way. Having a digital solution actually enables you to provide access to resources on how to take things in a much richer way than just a patient information leaflet. So, you know, that could be sort of one-way information, if you like, where, you know, you're just providing instructional videos and some kind of interactive service as well. But, you know, it could actually be the case that you want to have a blended system where you've got the ability to look up useful, rich data and useful, rich resources on how to use medicines, alongside reminders on either taking medicines or when to reorder them. You know, just part of the logistics that go on and the admin that we need to do, and then the ability to have discussions and consultations wherever you are. So we're not then limiting people to going and seeing a clinician when they're physically in the area, and at a time, you know, we can do asynchronous consultations where people are using chat and other methods, or even recording videos and voice notes, but not requiring that everybody is in the same place at the same time. You know, I think that's going to be one of the biggest opportunities there.
Yeah, can I invite other panelists to maybe comment on that question of the opportunities digital offers to improve that kind of patient support?
So I feel that what we need to do is understand the different people out there, because not everybody's equally digitally literate, for example. And we all know, I mean, just take COVID and vaccinations, for example, how many people were getting information which was unhelpful. So there's a huge challenge, I think, with the way people understand and process information. And I guess however we deploy technology, we need to understand that. I don't know what the solution is, but there are definitely big differences, you know, and we think about equity in healthcare, or think about mental health, for example, and are digital solutions appropriate, or how could they become appropriate, you know? So I think we have to think through these things quite carefully and sensitively, you know, really understand the person. I think go back to this personalization idea. It really is, there's something needed, but not one size fits all.
Thanks, Janice. Any other thoughts on that before we move on?
Could I just go? Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Shameem, and then maybe
yeah.
Alistair.
Sure.
Okay. What I'm saying is we as people, humankind, I think, are most irresponsible when it comes to our own treatment and diseases. So expecting people to take care of these things and follow up on that, I think it requires a medical grade kind of algorithm or behavioral change therapeutics that we can bring into the market, thinking that people are going to take care of their own health even when they are threatened with it. You know, how many of us have unused medications in our bathroom closets, right? We have been prescribed medications. We most often than not, at least in my experience with my family members, we don't even take the full course of prescription. We don't stop smoking until you start coughing and bleeding or something, and we don't do that. We are most irresponsible on that way. But on the other side, we have found that there are a lot of behavioral change algorithms that are effectively utilized by social media companies and other things, which can make profound change in how people attempt their own their own treatment and other things. This is where digital health can really, really make an impact. Is, can you gamify this whole process? Is that going to be easy? How can you do that? Is it the patient alone who is going to be responsible for doing that? So in my experience, one of my client who developed a solution, they found that the parents who were in charge of that therapeutics in the digital side, in having those markers and other things that they had an app for, were better engaged in the care of the treatment than the patient itself. However old they are, we might think it's children, but no, not necessarily. Which is why we see that people, even though they know they're going to die, they don't stop smoking until they start getting some blood in their, when they cough or something like that. Then for that first 1 or 2 weeks, they do it, they go back. That's human nature. So the way to do with digital therapeutics is behavioral change algorithms and other things that can be brought into it. And digital therapeutics works in that way. And when we talk about digital therapeutics or digital health, we should look at all the stages in which digital health being used, right from drug discovery, where it is very effective, which has been used, to digital, clinical trials, which is being very engaged. But then it comes to therapy, where digital health becomes secondary to the primary medication. It starts falling off, and then when it comes to actual just digital therapy in and of itself, it still is not, it's not as engaging. And that's why we see that in many clinical trials with digital health and digital therapeutics, there's a big cliff-like fall off after the first or 2 weeks. And that is where more research or behavioral change algorithms and other things, and we can borrow from social media companies and other things to help speed up that process or help adoption of that process. And like I said earlier, the pharmaceutical companies, are they in the business of finding cures, or are they in the business of chemical production of just drugs? And I think that is where I'm saying that distinction has not been clearly recognized by even the pharma. They think they're there to make drugs alone, and not just to find those therapy areas. And the business model also. So if they are not making drugs, how are they going to find out that business model where they can make those profits? So there's a whole bunch of things that needs to be unpacked on this. But until that is done, on the therapeutic side, as part of their treatment with drugs or pills, there's a support system, digital support system. And then the other part is where digital therapeutics itself is gaining traction, but it has not become really no meaningful successful digital therapeutics have come to market. And I think, and a bunch of us think, that there is a big goal at the end of that, where there is a cure, there is something that will benefit humanity substantially. But that adoption will come only when there is a Tesla moment for the pharmaceutical companies, where somebody is coming and actually challenging their turf.
Thanks, Shameem. Alistair, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to, in response to Janice, I think that's some very valid points. But I also think it's important to remember, you know, when Google launched, say people who were 40 then and you know, very therefore tech literate and all the rest of it, are now in their mid-60s, and have moved along with that. I think there's sometimes an expectation that more people than is the case can't use technology when actually it's pretty well adopted. You know, there's also with things such as mental health, I think there are some people where it's not going to work, absolutely, but also there's an opportunity for better privacy of services. People don't need to be seen going to a specific place, so particularly if there's also stigma. There is the opportunity to access people who maybe because of their illness don't feel well enough through either motivation or something physical to actually leave the house and go and attend something in person. And so I think it's important to have the option and a widely enough available option. I don't think that we should by any means be saying this is the only way that you can do it, because we need to provide, you know, a universal set of ways for people to access healthcare. But I think it can help with scheduling appointments, because you can make better use of your workforce. It can quite often save money in the operational delivery of services. And so the ideal system would be that you can use digital for some circumstances, and then that would hopefully free up capacity with face-to-face services to see a few more people.
And I'd 100% endorse that, Alistair. I agree with you completely. It's a mix. And I guess I was more thinking about, even if we just focus on digital, is the way that digital is delivered needs to just understand the person you're delivering it to.
Oh, for sure.
That was really
Personalization.
Rather than not. I'm very pro digital. I think it's opportunity, you know, it's full of potential to really improve healthcare. 100%. But I just, we need to understand the different, you know, groups that we're trying to serve, and design it sensitively. I think that was really
I think if we get some good user researchers and then people looking at that sort of user experience, the user interfaces that we're doing, we can develop a few options. And actually it's probably easier to personalize and adapt digital systems to suit a range of people. You can't redesign a building or a layout in that way. So I think you're right, it absolutely does give us an opportunity to think about some hyper personalization.
And then the other thing, I think, in a world where we often face what I'm going to say drug shortages, there's definitely an opportunity to understand where the medication is sitting. It could be in different hospitals, and getting that shipped to where it's needed. You know, I just feel at the moment, sometimes you've got people sitting with stock not being used, which goes out of date, and somewhere else that is needed and they can't get it. So there's definitely an opportunity there, just moving goods around, right?
Yeah, we would love a better system to support that, absolutely.
Can I, before we move towards the conclusion, I think we've already touched on the fact that a lot of the businesses and organisations driving the kind of change we'd like to see are younger companies. Can I just ask people for their views on what that ecosystem's like in terms of access to investment and support to help those businesses that are innovating scale up and successfully accelerate their new products or new services or whichever form of innovation they're engaged with? Becky, maybe you'd like to comment on that firstly.
Yeah, I think it's mixed, to be honest with you. I think from a startup's perspective, there's two barriers really. There's knowing where to get the funding in the first place, and creating your slide decks, creating your business proposition, and really thinking about that commercial element. But I think also once they've got that funding, it's actually knowing how to approach the market. And that comes down to, I see that time and time again, and it comes down to just really having that go-to-market strategy in your head before you're actually thinking about your investment, before you're actually thinking about your product. It is, what is the unmet need that my solution is going to be addressing here, but also, is it a true unmet need, and how do I actually get that to market? How do I get it in front of the people that make that decision, and also that it's going to really benefit? I think certainly here in the UK, the NHS is notoriously difficult to get into. But I think a lot of the time startups don't necessarily help themselves. I find, you know, a few companies that I've worked with over the years have got an amazing website, have got, you know, all singing, all dancing, wonderful sort of setup and marketing materials. But when you ask them what their strategy is, how they're going to get into the market, they don't have a clue. It hasn't really been thought out. So they might have a connection in a hospital or in a trust. They might have a connection in a GP surgery. But there's been very limited co-design with clinicians, and there's been very limited thought, like I say, on that go-to-market strategy. So I think it's mixed, and I think there needs to be not necessarily easier routes to funding. I'm not sure I can really make too much comment on that. I'm not particularly involved in that in a huge way, but I think there needs to be thought when investors get involved in a product as to how they're really actually going to commercialize it and how it's going to spread and scale, because that's something that's really missing at the moment.
Any other thoughts from any of the other panelists?
You know, I think in the last 10, 20 years, the approach has become kind of mercenary in the sense, okay, what is it that I can do that will convince a set of investors and that I can immediately do and cash out? And I think personally, having built at least 5 companies over the last 30 years, I think that approach is wrong. I think you need to be able to have the capacity to stick through time, iterate. And I think the famous quote, I think wrongly or rightly attributed to Tyson, is you have a plan, and as soon as you enter the ring, the first hit, the plan goes out the window, the first punch to the face, right? So the adaptability is going to be key. You have to understand if there is a problem that you're trying to solve, and there are different ways to meet those, to untie the knot or find a solution to that. And the current approach on the investment side, or the VCs and other things, they have a window. They have a 5-year window. You have to show them results before that. And then right now, the whole game is how much money can you raise? How much money can you raise? And by the time you have raised the money, your initial business plan is gone. There is no focus that is coming in. Some extraordinarily great companies succeed, but a bunch of them do fail. And that leads to a vicious cycle. And that's my problem, is identifying a solution in the true entrepreneurial spirit, and finding a solution to a particular problem that you have identified dictates a mental ironclad will and the ability to pursue that irrespective of what people think. Here we are, the moment you face a little bit of difficulty, you either sell off the company or just get off, and we say that is all right. There is no perseverance that I see in the market at this stage. And we have made this big what is the right word to use, a fashion of I started a startup and we raised so much money. Yes, you raised the money, where is the result? And those are my thoughts on that.
Thanks, Shameem.
Yeah, I would also add, very much in line with Shameem, I think that the horizon for returns and frankly how long the money will last versus how quickly a system like, say, the NHS can move and create the ecosystem to make a successful product or service don't often match. The NHS has got a lot of resistance and has an inbuilt timetable around its own financial years and targets and reporting and so on. So I think that there needs to be some way of helping to bridge the difference between the speed and the approach that startups operate at, and likewise with the NHS. And, you know, like all good things, probably meeting somewhere in the middle.
Thanks, Alistair.
And maybe the other thing to think about, and this probably builds on what Becky was saying earlier, is some companies don't understand the difference between strategy and tactics. So they might be doing an awful lot of things, but they don't actually have a strategy. So I think having an approach to formulating strategy, making sure that approach is what I'll call agile in nature, as in you can adjust to new information, better insight, you know, better understanding quickly, and fine-tune your strategy or optimize your plan is key. Yeah, so I just think a lot of people don't know what strategy is, actually.
Thanks, Janice. Well, on that note, after I think generally a pretty positive and optimistic view of what's possible and the impact that digital can continue to have in the future on pharma and in other areas of health, I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to say a few words, really, in conclusion about what they think the big priority is and where the big dividends lie in terms of progress for patient outcomes. And if I could maybe start with you, Shameem, and then we'll move through each of the panelists.
I think when people think about digital health, they are thinking about building something from scratch and then trying to see how it goes. So it's all about the building rather than the strategy and the effectiveness of what it needs to do. So a company like ours, which is providing the building blocks of digital health, it becomes easy to build a product. The idea is what matters, right? And so if you have something, if you have an idea that you want to take to the market, you want to iterate, that is what you can do on our platform. And you can go ahead and start iterating and tweaking it as you go along. That will cover your innovation process. That's what we do. And I think, especially in digital health, so like I said earlier, you have different stages in the development of a drug or a therapy or on all that. I think behavioral health or mental health, in the US we like to call it behavioral health, is one of the fast increasing problems humanity faces. And I think in that area, digital health has a better way. Digital health basically tries to change behavior through gamifications or any other thing that has a bigger impact on humanity as a whole. It is scalable. And when people used to talk about mental health before, how can you scale mental health therapy? But as we have progressed in gamification and other games and other aspects, this has a big chance or a big impact on people being able to live a full and productive health. And I think pharma companies, especially since we are talking about the pharma companies, need to embrace that digital side of it, and they should start thinking about themselves as more than a drug maker or a chemical drug maker, and think about a holistic approach. And like one of the panelists said earlier, it cannot be one size fits all. There are areas where you need the drugs per se. There are areas where you need a combination of drugs and the digital therapy that comes with it. And then there are areas where there can be just medical grade applications alone. And I think a comprehensive approach and understanding that is key to making digital therapy work. And it cannot be a panacea for everything, but there is a big area where this can help. It can scale and negating the need for a lot of therapists and other things. And we will be seeing that going forward.
Thanks, Shameem. Becky, big priorities with big dividends.
I think really digitalization is happening across the health systems across the world, and I think the way that care is going to be delivered moving forward is going to be so much different from 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I think really for pharma companies, it's to know your marketplace, it's to know your therapy area, and to know your patient journey. But also think about the collaboration piece, work differently to how you have worked previously, and think about collaborating with health systems, collaborating with patients, and really focusing on co-design. I don't think there's going to be one solution that is going to basically take over the world. I think it's very much at the moment at its infancy in terms of digital health. I think there's massive opportunities to come up with that solution that really meets a patient's need, but also massive opportunities for industry to come together, to collaborate, to work in a conscious way for the betterness, for improved patient outcomes. And ultimately, it's for pharma to think, there's a lot of talk at the moment within pharma around going beyond the pill. Well, it's now, time to put your money where your mouth is, really, and really focus on creating solutions that are there for patients, that are needed, and not just going to make you as an industry, look good or make money.
Great, thanks, Becky. Janice, the big prizes?
So for me, it's probably using digital technology or digital health to drive improvements in efficiencies in the healthcare systems around the world. Because if we can get people diagnosed earlier, if we can get them to access treatment sooner, access the right treatment earlier, help people understand what the right treatment is, etc., I think that will be huge. So I would say that's where I would love to see a lot of the focus actually is driving improvement in efficiency, which I think will lead to much better patient outcomes.
Thanks, Janet. And Alistair, you get the final word.
Sure. So, I think the information needs to just flow around the system much more safely, securely, and especially efficiently, so that then innovations can take place around the patient, around the service, and the technology or a service is sort of part of that, but it's able to make use of the full range of information that has been sort of adequately shared with it, and then you'll get improvements in accessibility, improvements in efficiency, and so on.
Thanks, Alistair. That brings this Health Tech Roundtable to a conclusion. I'd just like to take this opportunity to say a very big thank you to all of our panelists for their insight and a fabulous discussion. If you're watching this on the Health Tech World site or app, or if you're watching it on YouTube, please share this discussion far and wide. The quality and diversity of the discussion we've just had really deserves to be seen by as many people as possible. So thank you if you're watching. Thank you once again to all of our panelists for their contributions, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.